Heisenberg is the closest thing to relatable when it comes to the four lords in Resident Evil Village. He adores a bit of spectacle, doesn't kill villagers for his experiments, and, above all, wants to see Miranda dead and buried or burnt or otherwise completely eradicated from existence. This is his story explained from his past, history with Miranda, right up until the events of Resident Evil Village where he met one Mr. Ethan Winters. So, let's begin. There are endgame spoilers in this video, so beware. Just like the other lords, Heisenberg's bloodline is no stranger to the village. His storied ancestor is Guglielmo Heisenberg, one of the founders of the village alongside the Beneviento, Dimitrescu and Moreau patriarchs. With a crest depicting a horse inside a horseshoe, we can safely assume that strength, industry, and hard work were the Heisenberg family's identifying traits, as the horse has been the symbol of industry for hundreds of years. So, no surprise that they established the Heisenberg factory, the roots of which were originally a coal mine by the looks of it. A talent for engineering runs in the family, as decades later Karl Heisenberg would be born, kidnapped, and experimented upon by Miranda before using his own substantial intellect to develop his own machine-powered army. Going back to the very beginning of Heisenberg's life and trying to ascertain when he came to the village is tricky. I've seen articles online saying Heisenberg was kidnapped as a child by Mother Miranda, but for the life of me, I can't find a source for that in Resident Evil Village's files or dialogue. Lady Dimitrescu did call Heisenberg a child right here.
Quiet now, child. Adults are talking.
I'm the child.
Because either he was shorter than her, or possibly inferring that he was experimented upon at a younger age than her, as she was first implanted with the Cadeau at 44, and has grown up in the village, which I'm gonna go with. Later on, he said he's been in the village for decades and that he was taken, so however Miranda got her hands on him, he was certainly an unwilling test subject. Despite his resentment towards Miranda, Heisenberg was the most successful of her experiments by a long shot. He didn't mutate, he had all his faculties intact, his physical strength increased, and his control over magnetic fields and electromagnetism rendered him exceedingly powerful, with even Miranda admitting he's a splendid specimen. Unfortunately, that's how Heisenberg saw himself too, but he attributed a wholly different vibe to it, seeing his mutations as monstrous, and he hated being such a prized specimen of Miranda's, resenting the humanity and dignity she took away from him. Interestingly, despite his incredible power, Miranda didn't appear to have applied the cognition control procedure to him that she applied to Lady Dimitrescu. Or she did, but it didn't take effect. It is possible that she didn't suspect he harboured feelings of a, shall we say, homicidal nature towards her, so didn't feel the need to brainwash him, or that she took such a pride in him as a specimen that she simply didn't want to risk marring him as a subject with a brain procedure. Or she did the cognition control procedure and his loathing for her was so strong that it just rendered it ineffective. Later on, Heisenberg realised that Miranda was just using the Lords to get her daughter Eva back, probably due to him not going through that cognition control procedure. Heisenberg knew he got lucky with his affinity to the Cadeau, though. He noted in a diary that he was just lucky he had more affinity to the stuff than the other poor schmucks in the village. Growing up in the village and seeing Miranda's treatment of others, as well as her forcing him to serve her over the decades, gradually led to Heisenberg seeing himself as a freedom fighter, which is, yes, what he actually calls himself in the game. Working on his army in the dead of night and behind the walls of his factory, Heisenberg was consumed by the thought of war with Miranda, and this was reflected in his outfit too. He wore blank dog tags, which he presumably found in the scrap metal from his factory, indicating that he sees himself as a soldier. By killing Miranda, he hoped to free himself of her influence and finally have control over his life, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, yeah, I would want the same thing. Miranda aside, how did Heisenberg feel towards the other lords? Even a lichen could figure out that he hated Lady D with a passion. I'd guess because they were the two most intelligent lords, and also Lady D craved Miranda's approval, and Heisenberg despised Miranda, and therefore Lady D for loving Miranda. I don't think he really interacted with Donna and Moreau all that much aside from at their ceremonies, and I guess why would he? Moreau saw Miranda as his literal mother, and Donna kept to herself in her waterfall mansion. When he wasn't grudgingly doing Miranda's bidding, Heisenberg kept to himself within his factory, using derelict Second World War vehicles and other more organic items to develop his army. Now, look, the other lords kidnapped living villagers to use in their own Caddo experiments, or to drink their blood and enrich their wine with, looking at you, Lady D, but Heisenberg at least had some qualms about this. All the soldiers in his army were created using dead bodies, so yes, he was a grave robber, but at least he wasn't killing people, merely recycling their bodies into these things. And I know that's not good, but hey, it's not as evil as it could be, so good job, Heisenberg, I guess. Although Heisenberg showed some kind of moral objection to using live test subjects, that doesn't mean he was empathetic. His Soldat experiment notes are completely devoid of emotion, with his feelings only becoming apparent when he's irritated that his attempts don't succeed. Even when using the body of someone he knew by name, Oscar the stable boy, who was only 20 when he died, Heisenberg didn't note any kind of sadness over his death. Merely commenting that he fell down the well when he was drunk and that his body was in good condition, Heisenberg didn't reflect on what he was doing to this young boy's body, or have any remorse over his death. By this point, it's safe to say that Heisenberg had been so consumed with thoughts of revenge that he only saw the villagers as cannon fodder for his final confrontation with Miranda. I mean, his entire mentality is that the strong will destroy the weak. I wouldn't be surprised if he thought he was making the villagers, who were weak in his eyes, into something more, giving them a greater purpose after death. Eventually, Heisenberg got to the point where he wasn't content with the Soldat series, and tried to create something bigger, stronger, and fiercer: Sturm. Sturm was meant to be Heisenberg's big success, but proved to be a disappointment after it cut off its own arms by sticking them through its massive propeller. Nevertheless, Heisenberg kept Sturm around, either to keep tinkering with it, or just to be a guard dog / executioner of sorts. Pragmatic. I like it. Being stuck in the village for your whole life, under the thumb of the person who turned you into a monster, creating an army and generally having no one to talk to, that you like anyway, did end up having quite the effect on Heisenberg. So much so that when Ethan first arrived, Heisenberg enjoyed making a spectacle when he first met him, and took obvious delight in a newcomer arriving in the village.
You're not local. Even better.
Rejoicing in something different finally happening, Heisenberg didn't want to kill Ethan quickly.
Give him to me, and I'll put on a show that everybody can enjoy.
Instead, he put him through a game show gauntlet of sorts that he presumably had finessed over the years to provide a modicum of entertainment for himself and temporarily break the monotonous cycle he was stuck in. Considering Heisenberg only used dead bodies for his Soldat series, this does come as a bit of a surprise, but indicates that Heisenberg, again, wasn't as empathetic as you first might think. The dead bodies used in his experiments were probably only chosen because they put up less of a fight than the live bodies, and as he wasn't bothered about keeping Ethan's physiology in good condition, because he didn't want to use his body for his army, Heisenberg proved he can be just as sadistic as the other lords. I suppose Donna and Moreau found this gauntlet entertaining too, as during Ethan's escape, Heisenberg yelled out,
"Oh, you don't think I'd let you get away, did you? Gotta keep Donna and Moreau entertained."
Lady D obviously disapproves of the whole affair, saying,
Ugh, so gauche. What do we care for bread and circuses?
Heisenberg, however, loves having an audience. Heisenberg became a lot more than a showman after it was apparent that Ethan wasn't like anyone he'd met before. Somehow he already knew about Ethan being made of mold and the Dulvey incident. Plus, he knew just how powerful Rose was. Hence, trying to team up with Ethan, and for God's sake, man, why didn't you say yes?
You're futile.
Anyway, Miranda also knew that Ethan was made of mold and everything that happened in Resident Evil 7, so I'd assume that either Heisenberg found a way to read Miranda's notes, or became a confidant of hers, which I seriously doubt considering his hatred of her. Perhaps Miranda dropped some hints at the ceremony that split Rose up into flasks that her father was pure mold, and Heisenberg put the pieces together. We'll never really know, unfortunately. Unlike the other lords, Heisenberg is self-aware at least. He knows his role in the story, be killed by Ethan so Mr. Winters can move up the chain and take on Miranda. It's entirely possible that Heisenberg might have even thought Ethan could be used to kill Miranda, as he keeps him alive for a surprising amount of time in the factory, confronting him twice before finally fighting him head to head. In the end, Heisenberg suffered from the same deficiency as Miranda. He didn't appreciate the concept of family, and therefore just how driven Ethan was. He saw Rose as a tool to defeat Miranda, just as Miranda saw him as a tool to get her daughter Eva back. Kinda sad, really.
I must kill her!
So, there you go. That's Karl Heisenberg from Resident Evil Village's Story Explained. What do you think of Heisenberg? Is he the most relatable of the four lords? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, thanks very much, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Eurogamer, as we have a new video out every single day. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go, so remember to stay hydrated, folks, and I'll see you next time.